Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
In our course of lectures on economy and society in contemporary India, we now discuss the issue of agriculture and how economy and society are interacting in the context of Indian agriculture. Of course, I had already mentioned that my main interest is to understand whether economic growth that we are witnessing in our country is also inclusive growth, whether that was the intention of the founders of our Indian of the fathers of our Indian Constitution and of our of various successive prime ministers that we have had in our country. We wanted economic growth along with equity, so that those who are denied the benefits of development also can be drawn into the process of economic growth and enjoy the benefits of development. So, with this intention, it's very important that we discuss the issue of agriculture. Agriculture, because India is known to be a land of peasants, and Indian agriculture, India is known to be a land of an agricultural, its history has been etched by progress made in agriculture. Having said this, when it comes to agriculture, as I have already pointed out in an earlier lecture, the Indian government, the Nehruvian government which came to power soon after independence, did not give agriculture a priority, the first priority. All right? Agriculture was not given the first priority. In fact, it regarded rapid industrialization as the path to salvation. The idea during the socialist planning regime was that development means that it was borrowed from the industrial revolution experience in Europe, when with development, people moved from agriculture to industry, right? That industry became the dominant segment of the economy, and agriculture only provided food and the raw materials for industrial development. So, it was in line with the socialist thinking of the time that rapid industrialization will make for rapid economic growth, and also will pull up agriculture as industrialization gains momentum. Of course, there were some people, some Gandhians, who felt that agriculture should be given the first priority, but they were in a minority. Therefore, the priority was given to rapid industrialization. Now, having said that, it's not as if the government neglected agriculture. Agriculture was necessary for providing food. I don't think any country can neglect agriculture, and agriculture is a very peculiar kind of economic activity. You cannot compare it with industrial products for this reason, that people, we can live without televisions, we can live without cameras, we can live without our mobile phones, but we can't live without our food, all right? And it's the task of any state, all over the world is the case, is the task of the state to ensure that the people are fed. This was particularly important when India became independent, because Indian agriculture was going through a phase of stagnation where agricultural growth was not, there was no agricultural growth whatsoever, and India's burgeoning population could, was Indian government was finding it difficult to meet the food needs of its burgeoning population. Therefore, India, no government can afford to ignore the issue of food. It has to give agriculture a kind of place. You see, let me tell you one thing. If you are agriculture, in agriculture, if you are producing food, all right, you should, first of all, you should aim for self-sufficiency in food. And also, you should have enough food in the godowns, so that if you face any, weather calamities, all right, if there is food there is food available in the godowns to tide over the difficult times. So, most of the major countries in the world, ensure self-sufficiency in food by intervening in the market, directly intervening in the market, by giving farmers a higher price, by giving various kinds of concessions to farmers and all that. And of course, in India, peasant is considered as the mainstay was considered as the mainstay of the economy, because he produces food. So, Indian government, despite its emphasis on industrialization, could not afford to ignore agriculture, neglect agriculture. So, what the aim of the government, the aim of the planners was to ensure that agricultural productivity increased, and at the same time it provided it provided raw materials for the needs of the growing industries. So, the first thing the government of India did was to introduce land reforms. These were land reforms consisted of reforms of tenure, ceilings on land holdings, and redistribution of land, surplus land, redistribution of surplus land. Now, land reforms in India succeeded to the extent that it upturned the absentee landowners and the zamindars. That was a very big thing. And also, this was a very significant thing that happened, because the former tenants of these absentee landowners came into the possession of land. They became cultivators, small cultivators. And I am emphasizing on this because they are also the middle castes who became later the dominant castes in different regions and changed the political profile of India, caste profile of politics in India. What I want to say is that Yadavs and Kurmis in North India became a dominant caste in rural areas, not only because they were they dominated in terms of numbers, in terms of their demography, but also because they became very active landowners and cultivators. And subsequently, the other parts of the land reforms regime did not really work very well. There were several problems. The government could not implement. Now, the land reforms was the subject of the state governments, and the state governments, they always found a way of, the farmers, the big farmers, found a way of escaping the rule of the law. But be that as it may, the absentee land lots were disenfranchised. As a consequence, land reforms was a partial success. Now, apart from that, what happened was that the India faced in the 1960s faced two or three acute food shortages, and it was found that the kind of plans that the government had worked out to improve agriculture, to increase agricultural productivity did not work, because at that time in the 1950s up to the middle of 1960s, the idea of agricultural development was agriculture you can increase productivity in agriculture only by increasing the size of agricultural holdings, only by increasing the size of agricultural holdings, increasing the size of agricultural holding, you can increase productivity, because the idea was if you have large acres of large pieces of land available, then you can bring in all the modern technology of tractors, combine harvesters and so on, use modern techniques of agriculture to increase productivity. In India, since because of our inheritance loss and because of various other factors, India, most of the peasants were small peasants, small cultivators who had about the most 4 to 5 hectares of land, and this land tended to get parceled or fragmented. Land holdings tended to get fragmented with every successive generation. So, large scale farming could not be practiced. The government thought of using the cooperatives, bringing the farmers in a particular village under cooperative regimes, so that they can reap the advantages of large scale farming. The cooperatives generally in cooperative farms or even cooperative credit societies did not function satisfactorily. So, there was a big problem of food shortage. At that point in time, many people were saying that unless you have radical reforms, the land goes to the tiller, there will be no progress in agriculture. We will always suffer from food shortages. We will have to depend on American food aid. All right, it's a humiliating, thing to depend on other countries for food aid, and we did under PL 480, law. We were dependent on food aid from America. So, the point that's made is that India was facing a dire crisis in terms of agricultural productivity, and we were facing two acute periods of drought, continuous drought. At that time, these high yielding varieties of that innovation in agriculture, when high yielding varieties of wheat and followed by rice were invented by agronomists, which by crossbreeding various varieties of food crops, they found it's possible to increase productivity on agriculture, even in small plots of land, provided you have, you provide adequate water. So, India was facing acute food crisis in the middle of 1960s. As at that time, when it was facing acute food crisis, this new technology, which is known as the Green Revolution technology, came into play, thanks to the Ford Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, which introduced this technology in India. Under its package, the Indian government adopted, that was thanks to the initiative of the then Prime Minister Lal Bahadur Shastri and his food minister C. Subramaniam. They they changed the strategy for agriculture. In fact, by changing this agricultural strategy for agricultural growth, they in fact also change the the politics of the country. I will come to that in a short while. What this Green Revolution technology, as it came to be known, I'll tell you there is a history for this Green Revolution why it's called Green Revolution. Of course, the food crops are green, that apart, not just because of that. You see, there was at that time there was a before this technology came into play, there was a notion that Indian agriculture can only succeed, all right, in producing adequate food if there is a red revolution. That is revolution of the peasants, all right, landless peasants for more land. If the landless peasants get land, the tillers get land. If the whole entire structure, edifice of agrarian ownership is changed radically, so that all those who are middlemen are removed from the system, then and the peasants, the tillers actually till the land, then you will be able to increase production. So that the argument was that we really required this revolution, and they quoted the example of China and Soviet Union, where farmers collectives were organized, all right, to increase productivity. In fact, they didn't work in those countries as well, but that's a different point. At this point of time, this Green Revolution technology, came along. The people called it Green Revolution. Instead of Red Revolution, India is having Green Revolution, it said, because this technology did not insist on changing the pattern of land ownership. Even in small plots of land, with intensive agricultural techniques, you need water, you need to take care of your plants, all right, you need to fertilize the fields, chemical fertilizers you have to use, and you have to use hybrid varieties of seeds, so that you can increase productivity. And the productivity did increase dramatically, and Punjab became, in a matter of few years, Punjab became the food basket of India, providing supplying food all over the supplying wheat for all over the country. So this was the Green Revolution, and it sort of bailed out the government from a difficult situation. It did the institutional reforms that was in the agenda was pushed back. Then now onwards the government did not really bother about institutional changes in land ownership patterns and all that. And ever since then, India has become self-sufficient in food. we don't no longer require, to, as we used to do, we no longer required food aid from, the developed countries. This is one. The second point that I want to make is that politics, rural politics, got transformed all over India. I think I would link up Green Revolution technology with the rise of the backward classes movement, especially in North India. Leaders like Chaudhry Charan Singh, and even Mr. Lalu Prasad Yadav, Mulayam Singh Yadav were all the products of Green Revolution, and they brought in they gave rise to a farmers' movement, not a peasants' movement. It became a farmers' movement. Their emphasis, this was especially so in the 1970s and 80s, the emphasis they were, they became a lobby to press for the government's intervention in providing electricity for their, irrigation pumps, so that they can get water, they can lift water, to irrigate their fields. And they wanted government to supply the seeds at concessional rates, supply fertilizers at concessional rates, politics of fertilizer price fixing. Not only that, became a very dominant politics. Not only that, the government, these farmers' leaders were agitating for they produced bountiful surpluses when they found that there was the market wasn't ready to absorb this, the demand wasn't there to absorb this, the output, as a result of which the price of agricultural products used to collapse. So they asked the governments, they started agitations and movements to pressure the government to give them remunerative prices for their agricultural produce. This is quite different from the kind of agitations that farmers used to, the rural areas used to face. Earlier, you might have heard of Mr. Ram Manohar Lohiya's land grab movement, and that kind of movement, became, fizzled out, and this kind of new farmers movement, gained in importance. These movements were not really, were seeking not to overthrow the entire system, but were seeking accommodation within the state structure. Unlike the Naxalite movement, for instance, they did not seek to overthrow the state, saying that the state is the enemy of the people, but instead they wanted to make the state, bend the state's will according to suit their demands. So the movement became less of a revolutionary movement now than before, but it was nevertheless very, brought about very many radical changes. As I said, the movement for backward classes, the backward classes movement, Karpuri Thakur and others, are all the products of this green revolution. Now, so this is the phase till 1980s, 1990s. I can say that agricultural, India was quite self-sufficient in food, and when globalization, India opened its economy to global market forces, and India introduced liberal economic reforms in 1991, then there was another break. in agricultural, in regard to agricultural policy. This was because of the operation of market forces. It was then felt there were two factors that were becoming major impediments to agricultural growth at that time. One is that by the end of 1980s and beginning of 1990s, the diminishing returns started operating. Diminishing returns of green revolution started operating. That is, the yield per acre, the increase in the yield per acre started going down every year instead of going up as it used to be the earlier case, in the earlier phase. That was because of the overuse of fertilizers by the farmers, thinking that the farmers thought that more fertilizers you use, the more output you will get, and that's one. And then the soil fertility declined. Due to these factors, there was already a kind of dissatisfaction with the emerging state of affairs. Of course, this green revolution also led to the pollution of our water bodies and our environment, all right, and so on. I don't have the time to go into this, but so the agricultural scenario was drastically changed, and now we started getting diminishing returns from this green revolution technology. When the markets were opened up to global forces, when agriculture was opened up to global forces, one method of overcoming the problem that the diminishing returns that we are facing from green revolution was to go for more of scientific. There are two paths that this led to. One was the path of going back to using modern science, advances in agricultural, modern science and technology to increase yields. The other was to follow the traditional agricultural. The people discovered that traditional agriculture had several, was after all not too bad and had its merits, and was ecologically friendly. It was while green revolution agriculture destroyed the ecology, traditional agriculture was ecologically friendly. So there are many leaders, agrarian leaders started talking about sustainable agriculture, ecologically friendly agriculture, and it was also said that because of green revolution, the farmers, what happened because of green revolution was that the farmers had till the introduction of green revolution, they had knowledge of different varieties of seeds. They had collection of seeds. They used to always keep a set of seeds. Store a set of seeds with them for future. They had knowledge of different varieties of seeds. They would, and these seeds were particular. There were numerous varieties of seeds of say rice, numerous varieties of wheat and so on, which were locally adapted, to local ecology. So much so that it was not like green revolution agriculture, where the hybrid seeds, hybrid plants were produced in laboratories, and of acres and acres of land were, if you grow rice, you will grow acres and acres of the same variety of rice, which made these fields vulnerable to pesticides, pest attacks, and it may decrease yields. Whereas the traditional agriculture, because there were different varieties of rice plants that were there in a particular area. So if one kind of agricultural blight affects one patch of land, it doesn't it doesn't matter overall, because there are other varieties of rice that are resistant to these kinds of pests, so they would survive. And also agriculture, the peasants had knowledge about which are the plants which are the varieties of plants that you should grow when there is they had knowledge of drought resistant varieties of food grains and so on and so forth. So there's entire knowledge, and when to grow, what when to reap, there's the entire calendar. All this knowledge peasants had inherited from their fathers and forefathers. But because of green revolution, that knowledge that they acquired became, agricultural knowledge that they had acquired became obsolete also altogether, entirely. And the farmers had to depend on these scientists in laboratories to tell them what exactly to do. They became dependent for agricultural knowledge on in the laboratories and the agronomists. This is one, and that's why they said that traditional agriculture, ecologically friendly agricultural practices, we should go back to. In fact, that it's been a this kind of movement started all over the country, as a result of which to some extent the the adverse effects of use of chemical fertilizers has been moderated. Now farmers use manure as well as fertilizers in combination. So is the of course they use lots of pesticides, chemical pesticides, because hybrid varieties of plants are prone to the attack of pests. But even then, there's some kind of a no Indian farmer today sort of rejects these traditional practices. They try to combine it with modern practices. But with globalization, there was an effort to take advantage of modern science and technology, and there was this genetic technology. There were these big companies who are there are huge multinational corporations that control agricultural production throughout the world by standardizing production of seeds, and by they control the operations, and this they use genetic technology such which was such that it's very interesting. Genetic engineering involves putting even the organisms, taking the genes from living organisms and mixing with plant cells, so that the plants develop resistance to certain types of pests, and it's supposed to yield higher returns. This was particularly, this method, this genetic technology was used in the context of BT cotton, especially production of cotton plants. Cultivation of agriculture, cultivation of cotton face serious problems of pesticides, of pests. And this Bt cotton was introduced to get over the problem of pests, because the plant itself produces anti-pest, this thing, pest tissues, cells, so that these pests, die out soon. They won't thrive in these cotton plants. But they used this genetic technology was used. In fact, the previous government, even today, there is a big controversy over the application of genetic technology, but no government can afford to give up this genetic technology. Now with environmental stresses increasing, in fact reliance on scientific agriculture, science and technology would only increase in the near future. But having said that, what we now, despite these modern advances, all right, scientific advances in agriculture and all that, now we have come to a stage where we face the agrarian question has become a major problem in our country. How has it become a major problem? The major agrarian question, we have to answer this question. What is this question really? Right? That is, to understand what this question is about, we should refer to this table. This is taken from the National Commission on Farmers under the chairmanship of Mr. Swaminathan, the famous scientist who actually introduced Green Revolution. He was asked to submit a report on agriculture in India, and he pointed out that look at the comparative yield of select crops, all right, across the world. You find India always, you find that this Indian productivity is much less than that of China in many of these, all these crops, all along, in paddy, wheat, groundnut. Despite all this, Green Revolution and modern technology, China is doing much better. So is United States of America, and so is Japan. In paddy, in wheat, groundnut and sugarcane. So this is, in a way, yes, this also gives us the hope that we too, by suitable techniques, we too can improve our yields considerably. That's one. And there is considerable potential for increasing yields in our country, because we, in many of these areas, there is considerable scope for improving yields. But then, we are also facing, the yields are low, in India, in all these crops. Then it raises this question, why is that the case? Well, the reasons are not far to look, because you find that we are now afflicted with this problem of farmers committing suicides, right? I think this is a very dramatic change in our society. Why? Because I have all along been, when I was studying in schools, in the school and in college too, I was given to understand that the Indian peasant is a hardy person, he is hardy, all right. He has the capacity to face, drought-like conditions. And takes out and gets, land to grow the food crops that we all need. And he is hardy, he is a sturdy, hardy person who is capable of facing, vagaries of weather and still emerge successfully. Now, so can you think of a peasant committing suicide? That is that I think is shocking. But now the peasants have become farmers, and the farmers are committing suicides, all right. Mostly the farmers who commit suicide are those who are cultivating cash crops. And one of the reasons why they commit suicide is that they borrow money to produce crops that can be sold in the market, either because of drought conditions, because of weather fluctuations, or because of market fluctuations. You see, the farmers stand to lose both ways. If the weather is adverse, their yield will in any case will be low, all right, and they will have to depend on money lenders to bail them out. Now to ensure that they have enough food to eat for the next season. If the farmers produce, the yield is, they produce a bumper crop, even then there is a problem, because everybody else has a bumper crop as well, and the market prices collapse. So you will get very low income when you go to the market. So both ways the farmers tend to get don't get the remuneration that they expect to get. At the same time, there is another thing. One of the main causes for farmer suicide is that when they make decisions to grow crops, it is not on the basis of rational calculation. What's the price in the market, what was it yesterday, what was it last year at the same time, and so on. They go by the the local gossip. If they find that there is one or two farmers who produce something new, who produce a new variety of cotton, and that made a bumper harvest, and they when they took it to the market, they got remunerated handsomely. Then every other farmer would start taking to that kind of that crop, to the cultivation of that crop. As a consequence, what happens is the next year the market is flooded with the same variety of crop, because most of the farmers are producing it. Now, this is because of the nature of flow of information in these rural areas. What happens is that the farmers, farmers make decisions are based on hearsay. Because of that, sometimes they get into trouble. As I said, when the prices in the market crash. And then another thing, they borrow money, all right, to produce cash crops. They, if this year my cash crop did not come up, because of drought conditions, what I will do is I will borrow more, so that I can, I will borrow more and cultivate the same cash crop once again, hoping it's a kind of a sort of this thing, gambling, all right, with in agriculture. You borrow more in the hope of recovering your losses the previous season by producing even more on a bigger piece of a bigger area of cultivation. So, as a result, and if that time also they fail, you fail, then you will land up as a debtor, and you will end up being indebted to the middlemen, to the credit, to the people, the money lenders who have given you money, who lent you money, and that too in informal markets in rural areas. The interest rates are highly, very steep. Say at the rate of 1 rupee per day for every 100 rupees, it works out to nearly 360%, more than 360% interest. Anyway, having said that, so what happens is, because of these reasons, farmers are committing suicide, and that being the case, that apart, there is another reason. You see, there is most of the, what we should understand is that yields are low in our country because our pattern of land holding, all right, both operational land holdings and our ownership holdings are really skewed. That is because what happens is that now if you look at the pattern of land holdings in India today, all right, according to the 70th decennial survey of 2012, which covered rural areas, average land owned in 2002, that's 10 years earlier, average land holding owned, that is per farmer, was 0.725 hectare. Now, in 2012-13, the average size of land holding has come down to 5.592 hectare. That means that you take all the entire land available, all right, for cultivation, and you divide it by the number of cultivators, by the people, then you get each one will own 0.725 hectares. That is a small patch of, is slightly more than 1 acre of land, is about 1.5 acres of land or so, right. So, this is the farm land holdings. Holdings means, land holding means that land on which you are actually, that's in your possession, that is only this small. And given our inheritance laws, these land holdings tend to get smaller and smaller. It is said that you require at least 1 acre of land for agriculture to be for you to earn some kind of a return from agriculture. That means 1 acre means 0.40 hectare of land you require, but this is barely enough, right. So, the small holdings and fragmented holdings is a main problem. Not only that, you find that landlessness, effective landlessness has gone up. Earlier, this is on the basis of certain on the basis of a paper which I will mention subsequently. It is said that in 2002-3, the people who are effectively landless. They had some land, but the land that they have is too small for them to become self-reliant. These was 61% of the rural population was landless in this, in 2002-13. Now in 2012-13, it has become 66%. This means that the pressure of population on agriculture is increasing. With the results, our land is getting parceled into smaller and smaller households, and there is a tilted, there is a skewed pattern of land holdings. Not all, this is not equally distributed, but mostly the small land holdings dominate, the Indian agricultural scene, and there is, Indian agriculture is faced with the acute problem of landlessness. On these small patches of land, how can you, increase agricultural yields? That's the first problem. That's the main problem. Now, what do these people do? These small, owners, landowners, and what do they do to, subsist? They can't subsist on agriculture alone. Some of them do this, they give out their land to others to cultivate. This is called reverse tenancy. They give it out on rent to others, all right, for a fixed sum or a fixed portion of the produce that the tenant makes. They give it out to others to cultivate. So what has happened really is that our farmers are getting reduced to a situation of, landless laborers, semi-proletariat. You see, that's another major problem. All these, in India, we still, agriculture accounts for nearly 17% of the GDP, all right. Earlier, it was more than 50% of the GDP was produced from Indian agriculture. But earlier, 70% of Indian population depended on agriculture. But while agricultural productivity has declined, agriculture's contribution is only 17%. Now, there are more than 50% of the rural population is dependent on agriculture. So, there is heavy pressure of population on agriculture, on land. Now, how do you solve this problem? This is a very major problem, because you see, in the past, because of rapidity, even China benefited from that, by starting very many manufacturing industries, labor intensive industries, to produce televisions, to produce our Ganesh and other idols and so on and so forth. China, revolutionized its economy, but we missed the bus. Now, all these surplus laborers that are there, where do they go? All right? Because modern industries are capital intensive. They don't need so many, laborers. Certainly, they don't need so many so-called unskilled laborers. That's one. And then second, now the trend is towards more and more automation. You are not using, work, you don't need, human beings to work in these factories and so on because of modern technology. So, we are now landed ourselves up in a big crisis situation. I think that one should think of how to overcome this crisis situation. It's in order to make agriculture really productive, what is the strategy that we should adopt, to ensure that agriculture, in fact, given the yield rates and given the fact that India has, India's agriculture has, India has a low cost agriculture, all right, and India has 3 agricultural seasons, whereas, many of the other countries, especially in the temperate USA, has only 1 agricultural season. So, we can increase yields enormously, but how do you do it? If you increase yields enormously, you can even export, our crops to other countries. But the task is, how do you manage the workforce? How do you ensure that agricultural productivity increases? Right? This is the question that needs to be addressed. And then, I have not even touched the problem of agricultural marketing. That's another major issue. So far, the government is thinking, the present government, the contemporary government is thinking that by 2020, we should be able to double farmers' incomes, so that farmers who are getting, whatever they are getting, they should get much more. And then the government is trying to increase, trying to use modern, information technology to link up, to introduce modern marketing techniques, and so that farmers get a, fair remuneration for the produce. But the problem is that, however much you bring in this digital technology to the aid of the farmers, ultimately how can a small farmer who owns small bits of land, how can maybe most of them are are not that educated, and if they are not educated in that too in their local language, how do you reach out to the farmers, and how do you give them this information about new technologies? How do you make them cooperate? How do you make them better farmers, more productive farmers? This is why that Swaminathan Commission was instituted. Swaminathan Commission basically says that you should, to increase the farmers' incomes, you have to give more than 50% more than the average cost of cultivation of land, of cultivation of a particular crop. Swaminathan Commission says that you should form producers associations so that the farmers don't get cheated. Swaminathan Commission says that that you should also introduce animal husbandry. The farmers should also keep cows and buffaloes and other milch animals, so that they can enhance their income. All right. And so Swaminathan Commission says that you should use modern information technology regarding weather conditions and so on, in each locality, so that the farmers can know when to grow, when to plant their seed, when to cast their seeds, and when to sow their seeds, and when to harvest. And if Swaminathan Commission says that you should introduce soil testing facilities, provide farmers with soil testing facilities and all that. But this is a program that requires a vast bureaucratic machinery, and the chances of its success depends entirely on the way it is handled. That's it.